Change lives.
Cambiar vidas.
Change lives.
Change organizations.
改变世界
Change organizations.
Change organizations.
Transformar el mundo.
Change the world.
We're going to cover a wide range of topics, from new forms of content creation to new distribution and revenue models, to innovation and investment in the media space. And to help us out, we've gathered a very interesting panel. So let me introduce them, and then we'll get off to the races. To my right is Justin Ferrell. He is the Director of Digital, Mobile, and New Product Design at the Washington Post. He is also a Knight Fellow here this year at Stanford. Justin is a graduate of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern. He began his career as a sports writer at the Florida Times-Union and the St. Augustine, Florida Record. He then moved to the Greensboro News and Record to become a news and sports designer, and later became the Deputy Design Director for News at the Raleigh News and Observer. He joined the Washington Post, my former newspaper, in 2004, and he has held a variety of positions in print and digital. He's won several Society for News Design awards and designed the investigative project Angler, the Cheney Vice Presidency, which won the 2008 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting. He currently leads a team responsible for editorial and product design at WashingtonPost.com. So welcome. Warren Webster is president of AOL Patch. He has been in the media business for the last 11 years. Prior to Patch, he was vice president of Material Media, publisher of niche content sites including Babbel.com. Before that, he was director of magazine publishing for Gannett, where he was responsible for 40-plus local and regional titles. He has held various magazine and online news positions at Morris Communications, including Group General Manager. And he is a graduate of St. Lawrence University. So welcome.
Thank you.
Anne Friedman is executive editor of Good Magazine and the curator of Lady Journos, a website that highlights the work of women journalists. Prior to that, she was deputy editor at the American Prospect. During her tenure, the magazine was awarded the Utne Independent Press Award for Best Political Coverage, and spent 6 years as one of the editors of Feministing.com, a widely read feminist blog. And she is a graduate of the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Journalism. Welcome. Josh Constine is a writer for TechCrunch, and I just remembered a former student of mine who took my digital media entrepreneurship class in 2008. So this is proof that there is life after Stanford. He is currently a writer for TechCrunch, and he, before that, was a lead writer of Inside Facebook, where he covered Facebook product changes, privacy, ads, page management, e-commerce, virtual currency, and music technology. He graduated from Stanford in 2007 with a concentration in social psychology. Then he got a master's degree in 2009 in cyber sociology, examining the influence of technology on social interaction. And after he left Stanford, he joined Facebook prior to going to TechCrunch. So, welcome.
Inside Facebook.
Inside Facebook,
It's an independent industry journal.
Excuse me, sorry. So, welcome everybody. So to kick off, not everyone here knows as much about your organizations as we might like. So can we start by letting me ask each of you to give a short overview of your shops, the content that you provide, and the audience that you are trying to reach. So, Josh, you want to start?
Sure. So TechCrunch specializes in breaking technology news. So we're known as one of the fastest publications in the world in terms of time when news breaks to how quickly we can publish something of quality and depth on it. So that can be as soon as 5 minutes or less sometimes. So we have a very iterative news process where instead of spending hours, days, or weeks developing a story, what we'll do that. We have long form journalism and people take time to do those pieces as well, but we can go to a conference and using WordPress we'll literally be able to publish an article about something as soon as it happens and then update as it develops. So this lets us get a break on the a jump on the breaking news, and the blog is specifically for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. We're sort of the you could say the journal of record for the technology news industry and the technology industry, especially here in Silicon Valley. So we cover a lot of funding news, big product announcements and product changes from big companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook. We also cover small startups just getting out the gates, look at their product, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. Bigger technology issues around privacy, government policy, government intervention, censorship. We covered a lot about the SOPA-PIPA issue, as well as stuff basically for journalism. We talk about things like the need for comments on blogs. So the organization has about 15 to 17 writers. We're scattered from San Francisco, Silicon Valley, New York, Florida, and London. So with having an international news team, we can cover things at all hours. And let's see. We were started, I think, around 2005 or 2006, and were acquired by AOL about a year ago. And have been working as part of them, though we're relatively independent. We have our own offices up in San Francisco, and I love getting to write there because it's a very different organization. We'll probably get into it a little bit later, but we're a very flat hierarchy in terms of a news organization. We have an editor, but they don't edit. What we do is we source our own stories, we write them, we edit them and publish them and moderate and comment and interact with them afterwards all by ourselves. So it's a great place if you're interested in like autonomy, which is cool. It's like if you have an idea, there's nobody to stop you. It's really just up to you to produce something of quality. So yeah.
Sounds like a pitch for those looking for jobs.
Just something different to give you an idea of what the personality is. We're not an old school news organization by any means.
Okay, great. Anne, how about Good?
Oh my gosh, I'm so far away from this. So Good has been around since 2006. I've been the editor for about the past year. It's a daily web magazine and a quarterly print magazine. We still produce a Dead Tree print edition. And the founding sort of tagline was for people who give a damn. Specifically, the way I sort of describe our audience is that they are rational optimists, so people who want to understand the world so they can live in it better. That doesn't mean that every story is coming to some upbeat, sunny conclusion if that doesn't actually exist, but I do think that we try really hard to be productive and talking about things that people are actively doing to make the world better as opposed to just sort of highlighting problems or complaining about things. So the audience is also pretty young and also creative-minded. The magazine has a really strong design reputation. In its first couple years, won some national magazine awards for infographic design, and that remains a core of what we do, presenting information visually. I like to think of it as well as sort of using both design and a lighter tone, doing, like making that the sugar that helps the actual reporting and hard news medicine go down. And I think that we're also a pretty small staff given what we produce. There are about 10 of us on the editorial team, and we do work with a little bit of a broader circle of freelancers, but and also not super. I mean, it's funny. It's probably appropriate that I'm sitting somewhere in the middle on this spectrum. I'm not sure yet, but I wouldn't say that we have quite as flat a hierarchy as the folks at TechCrunch do. But it definitely is a peer editing situation. It's not like, you know, there are assignments coming down. Everyone is pretty autonomous as well, and in devising their own beats in a sense, you know. The nice thing about working in a team that's small in a magazine environment too is that it really helps keep that sort of tone and design quality that I was talking about earlier really consistent. So yeah, so really like what we are concerned with now is making something that feels magazine-y, that isn't quite the sort of the breaking news website and isn't you know, like a newspaper environment, and having that really brought to life digitally, as well as continuing to do that in this sort of more I don't know, we think of our quarterly magazines as like benchmarks, as more describing a moment as opposed to sort of the day in, day out stuff that we do online.
So Patch is all about solving the problem of a lack of local information in communities across the country. So neighborhoods where perhaps a daily paper might have had to cut back coverage, where every morning when you wake up, you want to understand everything from the important information you need to make voting decisions, to what's going on at your kid's school, to the latest scores of the high school football game, to the fact that there's a pothole on Maple Street and you probably want to avoid Maple Street today. So really hard-hitting journalism, and also just the things that are really going to make your life better in a community. So we started out as a startup, privately funded startup back in 2007. We got together a group of really good engineers, really good journalists, and a couple of business people, and basically tried to map out what we thought the future of community journalism would be if it's not going to be in its existing form. And the result was Patch, where we went to the smallest level of neighborhoods that we could find, sort of the smallest geographies that we could find, where people consider themselves you know, a resident of these communities, whether it's a neighborhood of a big city or a suburb or a standalone town or city. And we hired a professional journalist in each one of those and gave them great technology. We believe that partnering or pairing great technology with great journalism is sort of the model that's going to work going forward. And we, in 2009, sold the company to AOL, which allowed us to expand to 22 states plus DC. And that's been great for us. And now in 2010, we're the largest hire of journalists in the United States, something I'm very proud of in a time when over 15,000 journalism jobs have been lost since 2009. And we're continuing to expand, improve our technology, improve our offering to communities. We're a completely bureaucratic organization. It's sort of like a monarchy where I sit at the top. And no, I'm just kidding. We really try to manage the company from the ground up, where local editors know their communities best, and they make most of the decisions about what's on their site.
So the Washington Post is a very interesting and unique business. We are a local newspaper and a national and international and local website. So we serve two very different audiences. The mantra that we talk about for our content is to be the indispensable source for and about Washington. So that includes everything that our local audience needs to live their daily lives in an informed society, and everything that the national and international audience needs, and our local audience, in coverage of the federal government and politics and all of that good stuff. I am part of a newsroom that has a little over 600 people. We have 100 people in our visuals department. The visuals department is photo, video, print design, web design, and graphics. So very big organization. It'd be interesting to talk about hierarchy and how you get the right people working together. My focus the last sort of year and a half before I came on this fellowship was about sort of reorganizing us for the digital age and hiring the type of skill sets that we really need in the newsroom, particularly programmers. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Great, thanks. So just drilling down a little bit more on content, one of the things I'm curious about is how, since we have a variety of formats represented here, legacy newspapers, print magazine, niche local sites, very rapid reporting from TechCrunch. How are you telling stories differently than you once did. How much are you relying on old-fashioned sort of journalistic norms, and how much are you trying to reinvent storytelling and content, providing new content? What are you seeing your audiences wanting? Maybe we can start with you, Justin, go back down the food chain here.
Sure. Well, that's something that's really close to my heart because I'm a visual journalist. I think that the world is getting much more visual. You have to tell stories in non-narrative ways. I've done that kind of work in print, but digital especially opens up all kinds of possibilities. I would say that the real opportunity is in data, and we have put a lot of emphasis on that in our newsroom. So it used to be you would have data journalists who were really good at using. It's funny because it used to be called computer-assisted reporting, but who's not a computer-assisted reporter anymore? But so we've hired a lot of programmers who know how to mine data and analyze that data to tell stories, and we put them together in groups that include reporters and graphic artists and digital designers in order to work together and collaborate to come up with an experience that is better than anything that any of them could do on their own. I think that's where there's a lot of room for growth. It's complicated. You have to find the right skill sets. The technology is always changing. You have to stay on top of that. But I think it's very, very interesting. I did a lot of talking around the Post about the types of people that we needed to hire, and they're not easy to find. A lot of the programmers want to work out here in Silicon Valley, and so you're really trying to find people who share that public service mission of journalism and want to use their skills to further that. But the example that I like to use in the newsroom when we're trying to create the positions to hire the people is that, it used to be that you would look at a newspaper and the really old newspapers that everyone's seen had like 15 stories on the front page and there were no images. And then someone invented a camera. And then people started using the camera to take pictures of news events in the interest of telling stories. And I think that what programmers bring to journalism is every bit the revolution that the camera brought to newspapers. And so we can't find enough of those people. Thankfully, there are schools who are now turning them out. Actually, my alma mater, Northwestern, has a program to teach programmers journalism, and a lot of those people have gone on to found news apps teams at the Chicago Tribune and other places. But that's the area that I really see growth.
Yeah, I would agree with Justin that I think the technology brings a whole new. It sort of drives, in some cases, the way we produce the different kinds of journalism that we do. I think for us in local, there's a bit of a need to be all things to all people. So Ann and I were chatting earlier. We have our average local editor in a community simultaneously working on probably a big, long investigative piece about corruption in the government, but they're also having to cover the breaking news story. We had one the other day about a woman who attacked her husband with a cat. So it's that community. You have to do those quick hit community things, and you have to do the bigger journalism or bigger investigative pieces. But I think the means of distribution and the technology and being on top of that, I think it's critical that we're on all screens everywhere. Basically, is kind of our mantra around the office, where we need our local editors who, in a sense, are walking newsrooms. They have a video camera, they have a digital still camera, they have a laptop and an iPad and an iPhone, and it's amazing they can walk, but they have a police scanner, and they work out of the Starbucks and out of the town hall and in the school board meetings. And they need to be able to produce something quickly on video and then also write it up and also have photos. So the means of distribution and how we're getting that out there drives in a lot of ways the kind of content that we do.
So to be totally redundant, visuals and data also really important to what we do and sort of the future of the magazine. I do think that we have an interesting problem that we're still trying to solve, which is that there's a 5-year archive of infographics that were essentially made in a model like for a print magazine. Even though many of them were produced exclusively for web, they're still in that sort of like spread size. You have to sort of like zoom in and move around, like a really clunky experience. And a lot of that stuff is still relevant. It continues to be some of our like best trafficked content, but they're really just like from a technical perspective, transitioning that without redoing each and every one of these pieces is something that we're thinking a lot about. I think the other thing that I haven't seen anyone solving super well is that when it comes to presenting this information digitally without some sort of fancy HTML5 integration or like that kind of direct relationship with a developer team, it's tough to figure out how to present this information in a way that really guides people through a story. Narrative remains really important to what we do, and especially for our audience, which is not coming to us to get the first industry take on something or like to read the first just tell me the basics of like what happened in my community. It's really more about a way of viewing the world. We're really looking for different ways to walk people through that information, both visually and in a written format. So instead of sort of saying, here is this flat, large image that was made in an era when we didn't think about digital, and you can zoom into different portions and look at these different stats, but good luck with that. Finding a real way to say, hey, look at this number, and then and then go from there to this other point of information, and we'll sort of like give you a more guided experience to really have a clear takeaway as to the story that this is telling. So that's definitely one end of it. I would say, also from the magazine perspective, some of our best trafficked content is our stuff that is long form and narrative, and that is in many ways the oldest school stuff that we do. Finding new ways to make that valuable in an era when everyone is constantly consuming can seem like a really big challenge, but I actually think that like it's also true that as the appetite grows for I want to know what's happening right now, there's sort of a mentality of like, oh shit, I'm just now checking into this, and like it's not in the niche that I follow, but it's important enough that it's now affecting me, and like how do I plug in? And big synthesized pieces of reporting, whether it is visual or written, help people do that. So that's also something that we're thinking about.
So I'd characterize TechCrunch as boiling down to these three main components of variety, personality, and speed. So in terms of variety, we have just every type of content. We have a full video studio in our San Francisco office and in our New York office. So we'll bring in founders of companies, CEOs, and have them do interviews about what made them successful, how they got to that point, how they got their ideas. We also bring our video crews out to events and shoot live on location, and then we'll have lots of long-form pieces that take a few weeks to develop, lots of sourcing, and a longer form, far over 1,000 words. And then we also have much shorter stories, which are breaking news stuff or things where there's just like one piece of news. So for instance, Apple will do a big earnings call, and we'll break that out into a few different smaller stories about sort of what are the main points that come out of that. And through that, we really try to tell this overarching story where we link a lot to our own pieces within our articles. So it's not just about what's this one piece, but how does this give context to a greater narrative that's going on in the technology world. So with every sort of phrase or reference to a product or other instance of that company being in the news, we'll link out to them. Then at the bottom of our articles, we have this thing called Crunchbase, which is a database of all the companies in Silicon Valley and all the companies, and we have profiles of them about how much funding they have, when they did their product launches, who works for them, what they're about. So that way, when we want to talk about someone, we just link to that. We don't have to give that whole explanation within each article, which keeps things sort of short and punchy. So in terms of personality, the whole design of TechCrunch is to bring in people that have really different perspectives. It's not about just sort of this cookie cutter news. It's like there's lots of people. There's tons of technology blogs now. You can check out the website TechMeme. It's a sort of headline aggregator, and that'll show you all the different news sources that are big in the technology world. And you'll see when a big story breaks, there'll be 20 people that cover it. And so what we really like to bring to the table is a very different perspective. People will send send us press releases, but that's not what we're going to write about. We're going to write about what we think is unique about it. What is it that only one of our writers could write? You know, that nobody else, even on our team, really would have that same perspective. And along with having a larger team of about 15 people for the single blog, we also bring in a ton of contributors, especially on weekends, to bring in thought pieces about their areas of expertise. And I really like that because it lets us bring people who aren't journalists and make them into journalists. So it'll take like a founder of a company who has a really big vision about how they're going to change the world and what needs to be different. And we can allow them, we can give them sort of a pedestal, we can give them a platform to speak from. And they love that because they're not career journalists. They don't have time to do this every day, but they have something really important to say. And so to be a platform for that is really important. And then the last thing is speed. You know, a lot of technology news, there's these little sort of news bites where, you know, there'll be a story giving context and a larger sort of perspective on something, but eventually it really can boil down to some very specific, you know, almost like 1 or 2 sentences that are really the meat of the story. And getting those out first is really important. And so a story I like to use to characterize this was a few weeks ago I broke this story about an antitrust case against Apple, Google, Adobe, Intel, Pixar, Lucasfilm. They're conspiring to not poach each other's employees. And so I broke that story, and then I learned that next week there was going to be a hearing in San Jose at in the courtroom. And so I went there, and there was me and the Associated Press and Bloomberg. And they were all writing in paper notepads. And I had my 4G card-enabled laptop and was literally live blogging the court hearing as it happened. And so when the hearing came down, when the judge said, you know, this motion to dismiss is going to be denied, this case is going forward, I already had a story constructed around what was going on, my perspective on the case, and I was able to put that into that and publish that out. And so we're able to beat these very established, very well-run and you know, organized news offices and newsrooms by hours to the story. You know, they had to go home, think about things, write it out, have somebody edit it and publish it. And the ability to get that out there is like, by that time, like everyone already knew what was happening. And that's something that we really pride ourselves on, is like bringing technology, not just in the sense of like what the content is, but actually the medium itself is something unique.
Great, really interesting. So it sounds like you all would agree that content is king, and that the problem facing the media business is not the content, but what many people here might be interested in, the money. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about revenue models and the revenue models of your shops as well as the industry at large. There was a really interesting study that came out this week by the Pew Center, which tracks the journalism industry, that pointed out that for legacy media, which, as everybody knows here, is so reliant on advertising, the study found that news organizations have failed to attract online ads because they are not using technology that would customize ads based on users' behavior, much the way Google and Facebook does. And so we already know they're sort of languishing in the dust, but this study indicates they are really, really falling way behind. And what was more interesting to me was that a lot of the ads seen on these news sites, especially newspaper and magazine sites, were house ads. These are ads that promote a company's own products, its subscriptions, et cetera. So the point being that legacy media, which we already know, continues to not take advantage of these new technologies when it comes to monetization. They're slow using Groupon discounts, discounted ads. And so my question to you all is why is this still the case? Why is it so difficult from both a technological and an organizational point of view to push the ball forward here? Justin, you want to start?
I feel like that's your end of the table.
My end of the table? So I think I'd like to sort of seize on the last part of that. Yes, I think media companies need to get better at targeted advertising. I mean, Google's shown that that's a huge profit maker. I'm actually really interested in legacy media companies getting better at experimentation. And the reason why I'm here at Stanford is to study startup models and how can you incorporate that inside big organizations. So, you know, one of the things that Anna and I have talked about while I've been here is the future of advertising. I think targeted advertising certainly is something that people have to do, but you're still essentially doing what we've always done in print. You try to put the ad that makes sense to the readership who reads that section next to the story that they're going to be reading. So how has that really leveraged? I mean, it leverages technology in that it focuses it, but I think that there's a whole lot that we can do about brand integration. I think there's a lot more we can do with sponsorship. And, you know, part of in my company, you know, part of the hurdles that we have to overcome is sort of the traditional firewall between editorial and business. I think digital sort of blows that up in a way. There's a space between editorial and business that needs to be occupied by people who understand both sides. And the quicker we can get to having those conversations, I think the quicker we can figure out how to produce new revenue that is going to be a win-win for both. And so those are the things that I'm really looking at. You know, we do have things that are sponsored at the Washington Post. You know, I mean, it becomes a tricky thing where, like, you know, nobody wants to sponsor a particular story, either from the business side or the editorial side. It's not like you're going to say, here's a story on DC guns brought to you by, you know, whoever.
Remington.
But yeah, by Remington. But what you do want to do is you want to create tools that users can use. So one of the things that my colleagues are working on now at the Post is, you know, we do a lot around polling, and we have a great in-house polling crew, partners with ABC News. There's very few people who do polling at that level. You know, there's Gallup and USA Today, and the New York Times partners with NBC or CBS, I think, and then there's the Post and ABC. And you know, you can put up a story on Obama's latest approval rating, right? And that's one thing. But if you figure out how to structure the data around your polls and around the questions that you send out, so that you create a polling tool, a polling mechanism that users can go in and see, you know, maybe I want to look at Obama's approval rating at this particular time, or maybe I want to try to match it up in an interesting way with another piece of information. That's a tool, an experience that I think that you can figure out an advertiser who might be interested in that. And it doesn't compromise the ethics of the company because you're not sponsoring a particular story or multiple advertisers. I mean, that's kind of, I think, the business side that the data visualization work that Anne's talking about too really could enable. But the point is you have to have those conversations. And I think there needs to be a lot more sort of creativity around that area brought to legacy media. So most of what I'm doing here is I'm studying at the D School, which is the design institute here. It's founded by David Kelly, who founded IDEO. And their thing is about radical collaboration. Their thing, I should say our thing. I've taken so many classes there. Our thing is about radical collaboration and what real diversity means. And the great thing about that institute is that it brings together people from all varied backgrounds to solve really big problems. And so, you know, it's easy for me to sit around with my design team and say, hey, what cool thing do we want to make today? Because we all speak the same language. But we're not going to create something that is really breakthrough if we're all just talking to each other. We need to talk to the ad sales team, and we need to talk to the circulation team. And together we need to brainstorm what that new digital product is going to be. And I think that's where the growth is ultimately going to go. So yeah, targeted advertising right now, yeah, great. Need to do more of that. But I'm looking further into the future for sustainability, and I think that's where it is. But
let me say that don't believe everything that you read. The news business is booming. It's just different now. What we like to say is niche to win. If you're trying to sell ads or any type of product to a really wide audience, you're never going to be able to hit enough of the people that really care for that to work. And what technology news has really found is that if you focus on a specific area, become the expert on that, you will attract an audience that's very lucrative for advertisers because they know who they're getting. It's like if you're a gadget blog, gadget companies want to advertise on you. If you're a venture capital blog, then people who want to advertise to more wealthy citizens, they will advertise with you. And the model is working. I mean, their blogs are growing. All the technology blogs are hiring people. They're all poaching each other's talent away because they have the money. People are making really good salaries. And so I just would be wary to say that like the news business is in trouble. It's just really changing to a more niche model. In terms of like how you actually get advertising and how you earn dollars, I think the problem is a lot of news organizations have been trying to sell ads like people sell ads on the rest of the web, which is on like a cost per 1,000 impressions or a cost per click basis. That doesn't really work. What we found at my organization, my current one and the last one that I worked at, is that what you want to do is sell the space itself on your blog. Break down the extra space that you have on your website into a few panels and sell those panels at a monthly rate. It doesn't matter how many impressions they get. It doesn't matter how many clicks they get. What you're selling is your audience. It's not about their actions. It's about getting the eyeballs on that advertiser's product. And so by using that model, people have been really successful. I mean, TechCrunch sold for $50 million. We were a 20, 25 person company. My last company, Inside Network, sold for $14 million. We were about a 7, 8 person company. Like these models can really work. And then in terms of how you target those advertising, a great way to do that is to break out your content into tags. Have the writers tag their content with what specific category the content is, and then you can sell a sponsorship of that entire tag and have whenever a reader looks at one of those articles, then they'll see an ad. So for instance, like we have like Android, as Google's mobile platform, we can sell that as a sponsorship to Android developers, companies that sell Android apps, and anyone who has that as their specific market audience. Beyond advertising, there's other ways to make money for news too. A huge driver of money has been events for the tech industry. You'll see there's lots of these big conferences, and tickets to these conferences can run like $800. And that's because what you're getting is it's not only the panels that you put forward. You bring in these speakers often for free because they want to help get the name of their company out there, but what you're also really selling is the peer group. You're selling the presence of other like-minded individuals in your same industry. And so people pay because they want to make connections with those people. They want to network with them out in the lobby. You want to have drinks with them afterwards. And so you can charge large event fees for that because people really need that service. Meeting those people in an age where so much of the interaction is digital is really difficult. And so if you can sell that's a huge way to make money as well. And finally is a freemium subscription model, which Inside Network and GigaOM and some other blogs are using, where essentially you give away a large portion of your content for free. You have a normal free blog that anyone can access, but then occasionally what you do is you create specialty content and you put it behind a paywall. So for instance, at my last blog, I wrote for what was called the Facebook Marketing Bible, which was a resource for marketers specifically. So when a new feature would come out from Facebook, for instance, I'd write up maybe a 500, 600 word article about how that feature works for the general public, but then I would write about a 2,000 word article specifically for how marketers can use it, and we'd put that behind a paywall, and we'd charge a subscription fee of a few $100s a month to access that, and that's really scalable. It's like every additional subscriber that we get to that, it doesn't take any longer for us to write that content, and you're just making a lot more money than you can make on serving ads to that same demographic. So if you can figure out something that you're an expert in and create content and create a freemium model where you give something away for free but you make them pay to make it even better, then you can really leverage the exposure of your free news to drive in that maybe 4 or 5% who will monetize even harder and pay for subscription content.
It was interesting listening to Justin talk about how we have to sort of play in this space between editorial and the business side, because good is already there. That's exactly what we do. It's interesting although the magazine is still a large part of the brand and the identity, and I would argue has more relevance in terms of how we work than the actual end result or format. the magazine could disappear tomorrow and our business would be the same. Like the magazine breaks even, but we don't continue to invest in it, and we don't need those subscribers the way that other magazines I've worked at. They got to keep investing in and putting a lot of resources toward the print product because that subscription revenue is totally essential. Good is kind of an interesting thing. So we don't have quite as tight a niche as TechCrunch does, but the brand is something that is just everything. So for any company that sort of wants to take its social good initiative, everyone's got one. Toyota's lower emissions, or IBM trying to reach small businesses, or whatever they're doing that's sort of in the realm of the vaguely philanthropic space, or that is more forward thinking. We're sort of a really natural brand alignment for them. So some of that is traditional, cost per impression advertising. A lot of that is sponsorship of tags, so being around content we do in a certain subject area, and a lot of that is and a lot of what we do is, I would put it in the realm of agency work. So we have a team of folks who are in line with our sort of sensibility, but they'll make an infographic just for IBM to use. That's not branded good. That's that's for a corporate partner or sponsor. And that really, for us, it's sort of then there's a package deal where there's a thing that doesn't compromise our editorial, is not produced by our editorial team, but is sort of reliant on the standards that we set editorially in terms of that company wanting to partner with us. And then it also features usually some more traditional advertising component on the site. And that's been super successful. Good was profitable last year. We're not we are certainly hiring people. And sort of playing in that gray area between editorial and sales, it is true. Every time, we launched a new mobile site maybe 5 months ago, and that was sales folks and product development folks and editorial folks all in the room together day in and day out to make that happen. And it's really interesting because it's just second nature. There's no we have to transition to this. It's just, it is the way we make money. It is the way we make journalism. It's actually super, super refreshing. And I was having a conversation about this the other day, and I was actually thinking, I have no idea how to even function in a serious wall situation between editorial and sales. It just seems stupid. I can't even believe, for me, it's it's setting a standard is not something that that is reliant on, not speaking with the folks who are actually selling against the stuff that we make and the brand that we build. So.
Do you think that there's any conflict of interest in that, though, when you're writing about something? Because let's say somebody says, we're going to be an advertiser, and we also happen to be launching something next week. Would you guys like to cover it? Do you think that the interaction between editorial and affects that? I
feel like it's actually more essential that editorial have a good relationship with the sales team, so that when they're going out and saying, hey, do you want to, can we make a package deal for you where we're going to make you an infographic, our sales team will do it, or or a video or whatever, and also we're going to put your branding around our a column in our news section, for example. They're also saying, hey, this means there's no pre-approval of editorial content. You're not getting a say in everything that's produced under that tag. That they set that expectation. That for me, it's who's signing off before we hit publish, as long as that person is an editor and those concerns are editorial and not the sponsors, I'm totally fine with that. So there's a lot of trust that has to be built up between the editorial team and the sales team that they're going to represent our needs when they go out and sell against it, which is another reason why it's hard for me to think about a firm wall between those two sides.
Justin, how do you think that thinking would play at the Washington Post? And talk a little bit about some of the organizational challenges that you might face when you go back to the Post to try to set up this team that will bridge those two worlds.
Well,
because the Post has gotten in trouble in the past with trying to sponsor salons and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The Post has done some experimentation in that, in that area. Washington Post Live, which is the event business, is doing really well and is a partnership between the business side and an editor. Yeah, I just think that model is smart. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking at here with a group, a little startup group that we're working on is the problem of trust and transparency in media. So, same Pew studies will tell you that 22% of the public trust mainstream media, so 78% doesn't. So, you know, the question is, the idea of complete objectivity is already not believed by 78% of the public. So, you know, the papers in England, you know, take a side, and this is the Labour Party paper, and this is this. So what is it about American mainstream media that, how can we raise that level of trust? And I think it's by bringing more transparency to it. So if, you know, what Ann is saying is that, you know, you're very upfront about, you know, we're doing this thing with this corporate sponsor, and you're probably not covering something that's directly, you know, their competitor or something. I think people are savvy enough to catch on to that. You know, how that works inside a big organization, it does. It takes time. You know, it's you got to find the right fit. I mean, the single most, you know, to me, the single most important thing about the Washington Post is the legacy of the Washington Post. I mean, that's why I work there. I'm very proud of, you know, what the organization does and what it has done, and I think it's my responsibility to add to that history and to help push it forward. So, I mean, I can't speak for the whole organization, but I mean, these are the conversations that we need to have, and we are having them. You know, I mean, you know, there's been so much ground gained in how we do digital product development. There's been so much in social. We have a huge social team now, and I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, especially with Warren, that uses SEO so that people can find our content, and is really exploring like what the future of social media is about, what social journalism looks like. That's sort of the other big area, I think, aside from data. Anyway, does that sort of answer your question, or?
Sure.
I would add one thing to that. I think I agree with all of these sentiments. I think this is something we talk about a lot, and we talk about how we're tearing down a big wall and building a short fence. When you deal with a small local community, the people who are talking to the community on the ad side are talking to the same exact people that the editorial side is talking to for their content. So, you know, the guy who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce also owns a business who might be an advertiser who has kids in the school and probably has a whole bunch of other things going on in the community. We need to use all the resources at our disposal to get out there and talk to these people. So as long as advertising isn't influencing, you know, a decision on a story, and as long as, you know, we keep those journalistic principles in place, I think it's absolutely critical on a local level to work together to some degree.
Yeah, and this is not a new, I mean, it's not a new model either. You know, when I was a sports writer, if we were going to do a special section on the NFL, that special section needed to be sold. You know, otherwise it wouldn't pay for the newsprint that we were going to do the section on. If you can't sell that section, then you're going to do it in your regular sports section because that's the way it is. You know, so I don't think it's particularly a new model. I think that it really matters where you're coming from with it, and we're very mission driven. You know, I mean, you know, something has to pay for the Iraq Bureau, right? And it's not usually the Iraq stories that people really want to sell their advertising against necessarily. So, you know, it's always been, that's why newspapers have been bundled in this way. It's always been that the ads that, you know, that run in the paper serve the stories that don't have direct advertisers. You know, no one wants to sponsor, you know, stories about, you know, genocide in Rwanda, but we still want to cover those stories, right? So it's very mission-driven. So having the conversation, I mean, I think that's where the newsroom comes from with it, is that we know that having those conversations is really important to funding the future of what we do, and we do it because we believe that it's important to an informed society. If society, you know, decides that all they want is you know, sort of reporting on, you know, what people say in various industries, or you know, just sort of very public, we're at that public event and you weren't kind of stuff, then I think we're going to be living in a different world. I mean, that's what's important to me. So,
Warren, can you tell us a little bit more about Patch's revenue model? You, as you mentioned, that I think you've launched 850 sites
864. Yeah.
864 sites, hired over 1,000 journalists. We love that and commend you for that. But you also have a pretty high, from reports I've read, burn rate, and AOL has put a lot of money behind this initiative. How much time does Patch have from its corporate masters before it has to turn a profit? And how do you plan to get there?
Well, I'll talk about the first part of the question first. So yeah, when we were talking about targeting and the Pew study and whether or not legacy media companies can and should target, the interesting thing about what we do at Patch is that we are inherently targeted by nature. We are targeted locally. So that means a few things. If you believe, as we do, in the idea that Joe the pizza guy, the information about his store and what he's got going on there is just as important to the people who live in the neighborhood right around him as a lot of the other newsy type information that comes through. If we envision Patch as basically a feed of information that has journalism coming in from one side and commercial information coming in from the other side, all that information locally is equally important to the consumer, and that's why we think, just from a large sort of 10,000-foot view, that this works. Bringing it down a level, we've had an enormous interest in Patch from some of the biggest brand advertisers out there, the biggest consumer packaged goods companies, and particularly companies that have a global scope but are very local in the way that they operate. So just some examples, like Home Depot is a big national, international company, but they have a Home Depot in your town. Bank of America is a national brand, but it has a branch in your town. And what Patch can do for them that not a lot of others can is say, from a technology standpoint and just a placement standpoint, take that Bank of America, run it all across Patch, but localize that ad so it's focusing on what's going on at that particular branch, and give that local branch manager some exposure. They can have a blog within their ad. They can have customized local photography. They can have a video every week that is talking about events going on at that branch. So we offer them a national buy that can be localized any which way in 864 of the most valuable to them communities in the U.S. So that alone is something that could monetize Patch 10 times over. We're taking a very deliberate approach on how we build Patch. First step is get into the communities and build an audience and make sure we have the consumer product right. And by consumer product, I mean both the technology and the content that we have serving to the residents of the towns. And second, which we started last year, build up a really great advertising sales force that goes out and covers local, regional, and national advertisers, and make sure that they're getting good value for what they pay on Patch. So to the second part of your question, we're seeing enormous traction. Already in the first month of 2012, we sold 50% of what we had sold completely in 2011, and the trend is continuing to grow exponentially. We think this is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for us and for AOL, and all the signs are pointing in the right direction. I can't really comment on how long we have. I think all I can say is right now, we have amazing backing from our parent company, and we're all guns blazing right now.
I definitely agree that there's a. Oh, sorry.
Can I just follow up
Yeah, sure.
to this? One other quick question. Does this model work for underserved communities as well? There has been some criticism of Patch that while you have set up shop in Palo Alto or Westport, Connecticut, we're not seeing Patches in East Palo Alto.
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue, and one that actually Marsha Parker is sitting in the back there. She's our editorial director for the whole West region. She takes that very personally too. So I think, yes, it does. I think as a startup business, particularly before we sold our company to AOL, we had to make sure that we gave ourselves the best shot at success, and obviously we had to kind of go where the money was to start out. Since that time, we've launched a couple things. We're doing we're committed to the idea of serving communities that really have no other coverage. And I think we launched Bed-Stuy patch in a Brooklyn neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of coverage. We launched inner city Newark, New Jersey patches where there's really nobody else that wants to be there. We've launched recently with Marsha's leadership a Patch Latino division of our company that has 3 live sites that are going gangbusters right now. In neighborhoods that vary in affluence but are very, very cohesive, tight-knit, engaged communities, which I think is probably most important for Patch. So I think the answer is yes. In fact, in the underserved neighborhoods, we really own that. You know, we have an opportunity to do something that would be too expensive for, say, the Washington Post. I shouldn't speak for the Washington Post, but a big established media company, probably it would be more expensive for them to go open a bureau in some of these places where we can easily launch sites.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the concept of hyperlocal journalism. In addition to TechCrunch, I also contribute articles to a website called Uptown Almanac, which is a hyperlocal blog for the Mission District of San Francisco. And there's a number of other blogs for all the different districts. So literally, these are like a 10 block by 10 block square area. But there's Hateration for the Lower Haight District and a bunch of other ones. And the idea is that there's this curve where the closer something is to someone, like quite literally, like physically, the more relevant it is. It's like, I don't really care what it is. If it's happening on my block, if it's literally happening outside my house, it's important to me. And so if you think about that model, there's definitely such a huge opportunity because literally every community needs somebody covering it. And maybe that's just one person running a personal site, but that means any businesses that are in that same area, they're going to want to do local advertising there. I think the real problem is just finding how can you make that advertising business scale? How can you make it so you can have one writer who's also their own salesperson and can make that model work? Because right now it's like the local blogs in San Francisco are doing really well. And it's like literally like Uptown Almanac will cover the local graffiti, like graffiti that's on the walls or the sidewalks of the blocks, because that's important to someone that's on their way to work. Or, you know, a local bike thief was caught. You know, that's something that's important to people who are cyclists in the community, and that might not be important to anyone more than a mile away. But I think if you really think about like how can we serve what's most relevant to the people, to our audience, it opens up these huge opportunities.
Thank you for describing our whole business model. Except for, I can't wait to see the post on TechCrunch about how much you believe in Patch. It's great. That's okay. You don't have to answer that. But the other thing I just wanted to add, you know, I borrowed this from the editor-in-chief of Wired, who I think lives right near here and participates with you guys in some way. But he was talking to our group at Patch, and he was talking about how when his mom used to live in a small town down south, she would do the newsletter every day, and people would send her stuff. And it was all this interesting information that was only interesting if you happen to live in that little town. But everybody wanted to know her, and everybody wanted to get their stuff in. When you got to about 100-mile radius, you really weren't interested that much in what was going on in 100 miles around you. It was kind of like it's everything that happens right on your block and in your neighborhood and the people that you know and see every day and what you can buy in your neighborhood. 100 miles, not that interesting. You get to 1,000, 10,000 miles to 10,000, you've got global and national news that you're really interested in. The interesting thing is legacy media sits squarely in that 100-mile radius. The typical community newspapers, community broadcasting companies, community radio, all sort of evolved into this model where they go as far as the trucks can drive and as far as the broadcast signal would go. The problem is nobody's really interested in that radius. They're interested in 10 miles and they're interested in 2,000 miles. So that's why we think both of those things are super important. We have to get away from the 100 miles.
When I say that I think there's a huge opportunity in hyperlocal journalism, I mean for the audience and the writers, not necessarily for making money. Because I think for some people, it's just a labor of love. They say, like, this is happening on my block, and I have to write about it because otherwise no one will know about it.
Let me give you one quick anecdote. I don't want to take too much time. This is why this will work. The DreamWorks Studios had a movie come out for kids called How to Train Your Dragon. And they wanted to try Patch. They were very excited about the idea of Patch for the reasons that you say, because people are very engaged in what goes on in their community, and these sites were getting a lot of engagement. So we basically put together a program for them that they could advertise on each one of our Patch sites a craft fair that would go on in that town where we would then advertise for a local mom or dad to come and set up a little kids craft day in each one of the towns. So we did that. We put it on our events calendar. We lined up a mom or dad through the site. All happens online. We didn't have to do a lot of heavy lifting. On one day, right before the launch of the movie, across America, there were kids in all these towns playing with and putting together stuff around this movie launch. In Darien, Connecticut, we had 200 kids and their parents come to this event. DreamWorks was beside themselves with joy and couldn't wait to figure out how to get another program out with Patch because it has that local targeting and it lets them become part of the conversation locally. And that's why, people are willing to spend for that because of the engagement that you're talking about. And that's the basis of the business model.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you want to line up, and while you're doing that, let me just toss one last thought to the panel. If you could put your money behind one problem next year, or innovation next year, or competitor next year, who or what would that be, and how much money would you need?
I think personalization is the biggest question, and it's both a threat and a huge opportunity for the news business. So now online, you have so much data about the people that are visiting you. You have retargeting data from cookies being dropped by the other websites they browse. And even more than that, you have social data about, if you can get people to connect through Facebook, you can figure out their interests, who their friends are, where they live. You can get all this information about them. And then you can tailor your content towards that. So I've seen a lot of websites, especially it's been starting with e-commerce sites and slowly moving towards news, but I think this is going to explode in news over the next year or so, where essentially you have a firm or that figures out what interests and what characteristics of people that you can pull through these different, either scraping them based on their cookies and their previous browsing behavior, or based on the social data that they volunteer. How can you then tailor like a module on your website of content that's specific for them? So for instance, they'll go to your homepage and they'll see all the normal content, but then they'll see a module that says like personalizer just for you, and that'll be, for TechCrunch, that would be like companies that are launching in your city, If you like music, it would be about music startups. If you went to, if you visited Google and we're using Google products a lot, it would be more about Google News. And basically trying to figure out what data can you pull from the user. You don't have to necessarily ask them for it, but you can get them to either volunteer it or you can scrape it from them. And then make sure that when they finish reading their first article or need to know what to do next, they're guided there. Because I think a huge problem with news right now, especially if you go to most news sites, it's so cluttered. There's so much content. You go to like CNN's website, there's 100 different stories you can get to from the home page usually. And so thinking about like how can you reduce that noise and filter it down to what people really want to see, then it's not about them getting lost and feeling exhausted trying to navigate their way around the site. You make it really easy. You walk them through it. There's a path that they can take to say like, here's the next thing that's most relevant. Here's the next thing that's most relevant.
Well, I think the name Path is already taken, but if you're going to fund this data scraper guiding noise reduction machine, how much money do you need? So you want to pitch to the angels in the audience here?
I mean, you can do this. You can do a version of this with Facebook. If you have engineers, you can build this extremely cheaply, and the data is free. You can hire firms that do this for probably around like $1 million, maybe. I don't know the exact figures. But it's not super affordable if you have no programmers, but the dividends pay out forever.
Okay, we're just having a little fun with this. Okay, Anne?
Similar, but I mean, I've been watching the Post social reader with great interest, and thinking about not so much how algorithmically or otherwise, individual news organizations can provide a personal experience, but the personal experience I don't know I want yet, or I maybe haven't indicated yet, that really is network based, is sort of where my line of thinking is going. How do we take that sort of like that idea of like what my network on Facebook and Twitter thinks is important, and bring that in a sort of like in a community recommended kind of way.
Just on that, you can do that totally for free right now with Facebook's recommendations.
That is
plugin.
exactly what I was going to say.
So yeah, it literally will
free.
just show you what other articles your friends liked and read.
But I mean, I think that there's a more sophisticated way to do that than just sort of like, here's the list. I think that there's something that, would be a little bit more technologically forward thinking, that is like marrying this idea of, okay, here is what our data says, and here is, what to read next and next and next with something like the social reader experience.
I'll be quick because I know we have to get to questions. I think the solution for particularly newspapers, and something that we're really working on, I know a lot of other people are working on. When I worked in newspapers years ago, if somebody didn't get that flyer from Target or the supermarket or whatever, they would call the newspaper office demanding them to deliver it separately. That demand is huge, and it's still there, except not so many people are getting the newspaper. Somebody needs to recreate that product online in a way that really works. And, it's not about always giving huge discounts like Groupon is. I don't think that's sustainable. It's about sharing that information and having that demand satisfied that woman or man got when they got that paper. And all I would need would be 5 developers and 2 biz dev people, and we could do it. So $1 million.
Okay, there we go.
So I love all journalists. I think that, we might have different ideas about things. No, I know that sounds sappy, but we have different ideas about things, but everybody's trying,
love you too, man.
Everyone's trying to provide a service for the greater public good, I think, in their own way. And the thing that I'm really struck by with journalists is that there's a entrepreneurial streak that runs through them. And the thing that I want to do is to create a startup accelerator for journalists. I think that there are a lot of great ideas out there. Nobody's doing that specifically for that. I'd need a couple $1 million. That's where the social reader came out of. There's a R&D group at the Post, and Don Graham, who's the chairman of the company and on the board of Facebook, is very much about inventing the future of journalism, and he started that, and it's run by this guy Vijay Ravindran, who used to work for Amazon, and they created a thing that now people are using and downloading and sharing information. I think creation is really important. I think journalism's full of entrepreneurs who are saying, oh, what are we going to do about the future? We need to give them a mechanism to do that.
Okay. Alrighty, questions?
Thanks so much. That was a really good discussion. My question is for Warren, but relates to the interplay between the two of you about hyperlocal. I confess I love the idea of Patch, but don't use it that often. But I might be a reader of Uptown Almanac, for example. How is Patch going about incorporating some of those already very heavily traction micro-local bloggers, if at all, and bridging the gap between creating a brand new platform for a particular community and attaching itself to one that might already be very, very popular within a given locale?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we always try to remind people that we're not out to directly compete with those independently run blogs, especially where we are in New York and places like the Mission area here. There's so many of them, and they're so great, and we love them. In fact, we learn a lot from those. So we partner with them in a lot of ways. We'll run content, we'll share content. We've also built in a blogging platform to Patch where, it's been live for not even a year. Yeah, since May. And it's already got 14,000 bloggers signed up. And these are people who just have a vested interest in what goes on in their community, whether it's arts and entertainment or food or whatever, or politics. And they love to come on the site. And I think more than being a place where journalists just produce content and push it out there, we want to be a platform that anybody in the community can participate. And we're starting to see that happen more and more.
I think that it's lovely to partner with those people, but I think if you really want to turn it into a bigger business, I think subsuming them is pretty important. So I'm really a big fan of the SB Nation model, which was a sports blog, but basically said they were going to go into every city and find a blogger who does nothing but cover one sports team. Literally just someone who all they do is cover the 49ers, and they sort of recruit them and add them to the SB Nation network. And so through doing that, they now have a blogger on their network for every single professional sports team in the country. And so these are people that just live and breathe this stuff. And so, you can try to work and cooperate with them all you want, but I think you really just got to bring them into the fold.
Yeah, I think that's the 14,000 bloggers that we have. That definitely includes those people.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sir?
So I've heard a lot of people lament the death of investigative journalism. And so if you look at the evolution of news and digital publications, I'd argue they do a very good job of covering the softer end of news. But I'm less sure about the harder end of news. So this is something like Washington Post obviously does. I'd argue TechCrunch probably is as well equipped as any organization to do it in the technology world. But for example, does Good does long form, but does Good do hard news? Does it muckrake? Is AOL Patch? Do you have examples of people breaking corruption in City Hall?
Well, yeah, I mean, we definitely do. And the nice thing about having that print publication around still is that it gives a lot of people who have that skill set a platform that they feel like is worth that time investment. Or for there's a lot of grant giving organizations right now that will fund sort of one-off project-based things, and I actually think that that's super important for this type of work. It sort of takes it out of the constraints of this. All the business model constraints that we were talking about right now. So yeah, we certainly do. I think that as a portion of, or as a percentage of our overall output, just because we produce so much more day in and day out, it's not the dominant thing on the site. But there's still a commitment to doing that, and I think that especially for something like Good, everything I just said about companies wanting their brand near what we do, it's totally essential that we continue to do that. Otherwise, there is zero integrity there. And I think that one large investigative project goes a really long way toward allaying reader concerns when you see a brand wrapped around some of your more day in and day out stuff. So I think it's actually really important long-term wise too.
And I think for us, I would agree with what Ann said. I think one of the reasons we exist is that for a long time, a lot of the issues that are so important to you when you're making voting decisions in your town or knowing what your politicians are up to just weren't getting covered as much as they should. Government officials are always surprised when suddenly there's this patch reporter sitting in their meetings constantly, and that's only good for communities. In terms of how much we do, Good, I think it's not the dominant thing that we do, and I'm looking at Marcia for a nod or a shake, but basically, our local editors are covering all kinds of smaller things that happen in the town, but at the same time, they're covering some pretty big stuff, and I'll give you a quick local example. The Society of Professional Journalists just awarded Patch in Hercules, California, in the East Bay, the Freedom of Information Honor Award because of a really dogged 20 databases and 100 articles just covering all the ways government spending was going out of control in this area. Is that correct, Marcia? Yeah, okay. Town is collapsing. I'm repeating just because we're on film here, but town is collapsing, sliding towards bankruptcy. Nobody was covering this stuff, so Patch really led the way in bringing that to light. So that's something we're really proud of. It's something that's really part of our mission, and we're going to do that, but we're also going to do which hamster won the hamster competition at the 6th grade class. So it's always going to be a mix for local, and we love both.
So there is a decline going on right now in investigative journalism, and the reason is that it is disincentivized right now in the blogosphere. So there's a great synthesis of this. If you want to read something, I think it's called "Content Everywhere but Not a Drop to Drink" by M.G. Siegler on the blog Paris Lemon, and basically it discusses how in the tech blogging world specifically, people don't want to do their homework. They don't want to work hard. They want to take a press release or something that's really easy to cover and just write their little tiny spin on it, maybe give a sentence or two of analysis and publish that, because it's easy to get page views if you just write lots of content that's really quantity over quality. But the problem is that then people aren't breaking the big stories, because if I can write a good story in a half hour or an hour, but it takes me 2 days, a week, or a few weeks to write something really, really important. It's it doesn't matter how good that piece is, it's going to be difficult for it to make up the amount of page views that you might be able to get with a shorter story. But that's not good journalism. We have to challenge ourselves to say, when there's something important going on, I'm going to take the time off. I don't care if I miss some other stories. I'm going to say, I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to make a ton of calls. I'm going to get deep into this and write something that's not just a rehash of something else, but something that will actually change the industry, that will push an issue forward. And so if you want to know why it's going on, it's because that's the money is pushing it towards thinner content. unfortunately.
Yeah, and I just want to say, thankfully, there are some people who are funding it. Like ProPublica is a really interesting model, and the Center for Investigative Reporting in Berkeley is doing really interesting work too. So I hope there's more of that.
Okay, Sally?
Well, this turns out to be a bit of a follow-up to the previous question. I'm very interested in the conversation about the flattening of the business editorial divide. And this is happening, we have to remember, not just with journalists as our competitors, but also flattening of the information environment as a whole. So I know, I mean, I've been hearing just in this last conversation that you all adhere to the journalistic mission, to the ethics, to avoiding conflict of interest. But how do we convince consumers that that's the case? How do we convince them that that's important? Because arguably, I could go to a site put together by a petrochemical company about energy, or some marketing company putting together a site about fashion that might be better informed than the journalist who comes in from the outside in order to cover it.
I mean, transparency. And I think that that doesn't mean a statement that's buried in your About Us section. Mm-hmm. That means on a post that they might see next to sort of like a, you know, like Toyota, like branding that sort of says, hey, Toyota helped us. God, I keep talking about Toyota today. I'm out of control. Toyota.
How much are they paying?
Yeah, I know, right? You know, like with Toyota support, like, you know, we do this series. No one at Toyota approves or rejects content that appears in this space. It is written by and edited by our editors. I mean, and I think that like that's saying, you know, we get money from Toyota. Like that's what this ad means. Like duh. And that, you know, we produce it and we are the gatekeeper is the way to do it on the post.
I think the flat hierarchy of the sort of modern newsroom is helping this, because before it was like there was an editor who might have some connection with someone who wanted to push some agenda, who wanted to help out with some relationship, and so they would say like, oh, you should tone that down a little bit, or like maybe you should think about writing this instead. But luckily with like the flat editorial model, where I don't have to ask anybody else what I write about and nobody else tells me or changes my words, you know, I can write whatever I want, and I don't care if I offend somebody else's source. Like you might be, one of our other writers might be friends with someone, or might have a sibling or a spouse that works somewhere, but it's like, I don't care. Because of the flat hierarchical model, I can write whatever I want. And so I think that that's assisting with it. But I agree, it's all about disclosure, and not just about financial disclosure. It's not just who's paying you, but unfortunately, we really need to look beyond that to like, who are you friends with? Like, what are your biases? Not just where's the money coming from?
Yeah, we do something on Patch that some people think is great and some people don't like, where every one of our local editors does what we call the Fess Up, and it is kind of in the About Us section, but you can find it if you want to. It's basically political beliefs, things, questions about like where they come from, not because we want everyone to just put themselves out there, but because we want to say this is who I am as a writer or as a person. And when social is going to be increasing, and it obviously is huge. I hope that there's not a time that there isn't a place for curated discovery. And I think the curators are the journalists and editors who are have earned the trust of people to get that information.
But then I have to come to your site.
Or it could be fed out in any different number of ways. Yeah.
I think that there's...
But social, I don't trust any of my friends to tell me everything I need to know.
Well, me neither, but I don't have a place where I go to know that, you say fed through any number of ways. What are those ways if they're not social?
Right. Well,
so there's somebody came to the site, right?
Reader.
I mean, if you're following people on Twitter and they put a link to one of our sites, they either went to the site or somebody who sent it to them on Twitter went to the site or something. So
maybe the author sent it to the
I certainly think, obviously, social is only going to get bigger, and people really trust what their friends read or what their network reads or whatever. So, but yeah, there still has to be the source.
I believe in like headline aggregators. So there's a website called TechMeme, TechMeme, and basically what that does is it algorithmically looks at all the biggest tech blogs and looks for what are the big stories of the day, and it analyzes those by who is linking to who. So let's say if somebody breaks a story, all the other great blogs will know they broke the story and we got to say so, and so they link to them. And so that post that broke the story will rise up on this website, a sort of list of the big headlines of the day. And then in addition to the algorithmic side of it, they have human editors who then re-rank things saying this is more important, or this story isn't actually accurate, we're going to move it down the site or kick it off the site. And so I think that it's beyond social, like a combination of algorithmic and human editors using these sort of aggregators that they're not trying to steal the content. They're really just a link base. But I think that that's a huge discovery mechanism that we're going to see move out from just technology and move to a whole lot of other different verticals.
I mean, I think for us anyway, it's thinking of article pages or individual content pages as home pages, like, you know, a site's homepage or like some kind of, you know, tag page or like a subsection is less and less and less relevant. And so this idea that, like, you know, do we take as a given that, you know, most people are going to find us through social? Yeah. And, you know, the answer is just sort of like, how do you make that experience when they come to you feel like you're presenting way more stuff that is the most relevant stuff that you can present, that's not just, here's this one article you came for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, we want to thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our panel.
Change lives.
Cambiar vidas.
Change lives.
Change organizations. 改变世界. Change organizations.
Change organizations.
Change the world.